So, ladies and gentlemen, we are back to our first virtual symposium of the Greek Scientists Society. Our next panel is quite intriguing and quite interesting. We're honored to have everyone here with us today, as we all witnessed governments reacting in the best possible way during the pandemic, which, well, it surely did not bring Greece to its knees. How should the government anticipate the new reality, spark a way of innovation for the scientific community and the industry, and prepare the citizens to become digitally enabled within this transition period? This is the topic of discussion from our second panel, which will be moderated by Mr. Athanasios Ellis, Editor-in-Chief of Kathimerini English Edition and a former Washington correspondent. Mr. Ellis will be the host of the representatives we mentioned at the beginning of our symposium on behalf of the governments of Greece and of Cyprus. It is an honor to have the Deputy Ministers of Cyprus and Greece here, Mrs. Anna Diamantopoulou, an excellent lady, a lady to look up for with her work. She makes us proud. But before we start, allow me to ask a question to Mr. Athanasios Ellis. You have interviewed during your career multiple important men and women, from elected President Joe Biden to Nicolas Sarkozy, Mr. Erdogan. I would like to know, which one was your favorite interview among all these important people, sir?
Well, let me point out that Biden was not president when I interviewed him. He was almost becoming vice president. I would say Erdogan. He was 2004. It was after the Annan plant. He was in Greece. And those were the good days when we hoped that Cyprus would move forward. He was very, positive compared to Egypt and others in the past. But things have moved in the wrong direction, and every year seems to be worse than the previous. But most of them were very interesting personalities, and of course, also, I would say Strauss-Kahn in 2010 was very big, because, and actually he said about the crisis, I don't see the IMF and the international community as somebody who's coming to punish you. We, he said, are the doctors, and the prescription may be tough, but you have to take it. So I would say on the institutional level, Strauss-Kahn, and on the political level, Erdogan.
Excellent. That's very interesting. I'm looking forward for your book with all these interviews. So with no further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Athanasios Ellis will introduce to our panelists representing the governments of Greece and Cyprus. The stage is yours.
Thank you very much. We're moving from the philosophical world, based on what we heard in the previous hour, to the dry hour world, the everyday world, where governments and the private sector is trying to deal with innovation. And we have people who know about it. And I would start with the lady, Mrs. Diamantopoulou, who is with us. She's a former European Commission commissioner, the European Union, which says a lot about her personality. Presently, she's the founder and president of DIKTYO. But she was also a minister, among other things, of education and also development and research and innovation. So, I think she's the perfect person to answer a few of our questions. We'll start with her presentation, and then we'll move to the other three gentlemen. As I see it, for the time being, we only have two of them, but I think they're coming up very soon. They will be with us. Ms. Diamantopoulou.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for this invitation, and my congratulations for this organization, particularly to Mr. Zacharis. Coordinating scientific communities of Greek diaspora with those within Greece, it has been always a challenge for governments, and it continues to be. I have my own experience on that, and I have been in Silicon Valley with Mr. Pierrakakis at that time, many years ago, and we had tried to organize this network. One of these conferences' underlying ideas is to draw parallels with ancient Greek philosophy. As the latest principle is the basis of alignment and the basis of scientific evolution across the world and across centuries and spaces, it's becoming pretty clear that these principles have been universal. They are not just Greeks. So what would be interesting, and this is an idea that if you like, we can work on that, is the establishment of a new affectiony comprised of scientific communities, namely to create thematic communities of scientists and get them connected with each other on the basis of common objectives. So let us think, if you find interesting, how this new kind of Greek affectionies could be. Now, coming back to the government's world, my recent cooperation with the 38 countries of the OECD countries has made it very clear that there are common priorities across the world. And I could say three of them. It is the digital transformation, it is the climate change, and it is the new models of welfare state, and particularly new models in education, in the health systems, and in the labor markets. Climate change and digitization, which are two priorities for the Greek government as well, are interconnected and they go hand in hand with scientific, digital, and technological developments. So policies for governments are becoming more and more complex to design and are also more data-driven. I will be referring to some lines. I'm pick up some priorities, 5 of them. The first one is the word foresight. We know that during the pandemic world and after that, our primary goals are 2. It is recovery and resilience. So it is a must for governments to organize foresight hubs, foresight mechanisms, because they have to prepare their structures and their infrastructures for future shocks. The second issue, narrative. Politics is about managing both today and tomorrow. So governments, whatever they do, and in cooperation with their scientists and their networks, they have to persuade people for the digital transformation, for the climate change. So they need new kind of narratives, grand narratives, where people can understand what they have to win and what they have to lose out. The third issue is organizing clusters. Clusters comprised by both scientists and firms, private sector. And speaking about Greece, what we particularly, and for Cyprus as well, need is an institutional framework and financial support. We need a simple and solid legal framework, setting universities and researchers free of bureaucracy, facilitating international synergies, and using in an efficient way the new financial instruments, from angels, investors to venture capitalists. It is a must that we have to develop it in Greece in a different way, particularly for innovation reasons. The fourth issue is that the governments on this area need to have qualitative and quantitative goals with political agenda and scientific foundations. What do I mean by that? Concrete goals means that in all areas, for example, in justice and AA, public administrations and AA, precise agriculture, transportation, the issue of healthcare, where there are so big challenges, and of course, preparing SMEs and multinationals for thriving in the new digital economy. And in Greece, particularly important, the defense sector. So, narrative and concrete goals. The fifth issue, it is education and lifelong learning policies. No time to speak about education, which is a very complicated issue in Greece, particularly with universities. But I would like just to make a very concrete comment about the need for digital reskilling of adults. I think this is one of the major issues there is a need that this reskilling, digital reskilling, must be a universal service. And this is the case in many countries. And they have organized this issue with vouchers, so with cooperation between public and private sector. And this is my last point. In this new era, there is a need of instruments based on the cooperation of public and private sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Diamantopoulou. Going back to you, Elise, Mr. Elise.
Mrs. Diamantopoulou, for the fact that I did not have to interrupt, which is usually the case with many speakers. I welcome Mr. Dimas, who is with us also. And we'll move to Mr. Kyriakos, who is the Minister for Digital Governance. It's an interesting ministry these days because not only a lot of change is taking place, but because of the pandemic, it's a must for the country, for the companies, for the government, for the schools. So it's most people, if you believe the polls, and on that note, I do believe them with respect to the specific minister, a lot of work is being done. So I welcome the minister to tell us how he's doing it or present his view, and then we'll move to some questions. Mr. Pierrakakis.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ellis. Congratulations to the organizers for this digital convention. I have to say that I'm very happy to be on the same panel with people that I deeply respect and I closely work or have worked with. And let me go straight to answering your question. So far, what we have been trying to do vis-a-vis digital transformation, especially in a very challenging year.
Do we have the minister with us? Can Mr. Pierrakakis hear us?
I can fully hear you. No?
Yes.
We hear it. We hear him very well.
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Go ahead. I think we are okay.
Very good. Okay, I'm just double checking from my end. Thank you.
So during a very challenging year, what we have been trying to do was to follow up with a very aggressive digital agenda, which started with the digitization of the services in the public sphere and how citizens could be better served by the state, especially during COVID, where we had to achieve business continuity overall, both in the private and in the public sector. And in that sense, we have two things to show for, which overall, I think, underline a change in how the state treats its citizens. The creation of the Unified Government Portal, gov.gr, which started with 501 digital services last year and now has more than 1,100 services. And I think there is an interesting number to also share, how in 2 years the Greek state has overall digitized in those interactions. From the calls that we have in our interoperability center in the General Secretariat of Information Systems, which shows, I think, a huge leap from 8.8 million calls in 2018 to 94 million in 2020. Almost times 12 change in the digital state. And those 94 calls are effectively 94 million visits, which didn't take place in a pandemic. So in a sense, we instrumentalized an already existing policy, that of simplifying services and digitizing the state, to a tool to battle the virus. But in order to address the nucleus of the question, which has to do a lot with leveraging the capabilities of Greek scientists and researchers overall around the globe, I think it's quite interesting to share our policy on 5G, which effectively was a trifecta of policy, but which had the purpose of answering this question at its core. And this policy effectively treated the auction process as a business-friendly process, which had to be completed quite soon. So last December, we completed our auction on 5G for all 4 bands of 5G. And most countries have had challenges in terms of doing that. But I think the most interesting aspect of this are the following 2 policy ideas. So the question on 5G is mostly how economic activity will be generated. And this is not a telecom question. It's a question on the vertical sectors of society which will be transformed by those new technological capabilities. So for instance, we speak about driverless cars. We speak about robotic surgeries from afar. Those are all capabilities that will be enabled by this new network. So the question becomes, how do you push, how do you generate those capabilities from the point of view, from the lens of the policymaker or of the state. The classical old school approach would make us focus, for instance, on classical subsidies. But this hasn't proven to be a smart policy, especially in the technological sphere. So what we thought was to effectively instrumentalize the auction, obtain 25% of the auction proceeds. So we had an overall auction of 372 million euros. We got 93 million euros out of this. And we endowed the venture capital fund in Greece, which is a targeted 5G fund. So the idea behind this fund, which we call Festos, is to invest. First of all, the managers will fundraise from the private sector, from family offices, from other companies. So the total amount that will be handled by the fund will be much more than 93 million at the end. And the fundraising process shall conclude by mid this year. And then the managers of the fund will be investing in startups or larger companies that produce technological products that have to do with 5G. So this is part, let's say, of our approach towards generating an ecosystem and leveraging capabilities. The third part of this policy, of course, is even more targeted towards researchers, towards universities and research centers, and has to do with the fact that we didn't auction the full spectrum, but we kept a small portion of it, and we're handling it through the Ministry of Digital Governance, and we're offering access for free to research centers, universities, and startups. So if you take all of those three things together, it's a policy overall to generate value in an ecosystem, to leverage resources from researchers, from startups, from spin-offs, from people who are either within Greece or all over the world, and to create an ecosystem around 5G technologies in this country. Now, following up and concluding with what is next in that sphere, I think that we need to significantly leverage the significant resources that we have in front of us from the RRF, from the post-COVID reconstruction funds that we will have access to through the EU. And there, 20% of this overall package shall focus on digital projects. So we have published our digital strategy, which we call the Digital Bible. It's online, and it's not only a strategy, it's actually a very concrete action plan with more than 400 projects. And amongst these projects, I think one of the things that we should be focusing on is exactly what Anna Diamantopoulou said, that reskilling, technological reskilling is extremely significant, especially as we are focusing on digitizing the state and the economy overall. This proved to be a challenge last year. It's still a challenge. And the challenge is actually vis-a-vis that old quote that says that the devil lies in the detail. We need to answer the question, what reskilling and through which mechanisms? And still, overall throughout the world, we have had challenges with regards to focusing those programs, especially given what we need with all those emerging technologies that we're seeing all around the world. Overall, university systems are transitioning toward reskilling and more targeted programs from more classical, bigger programs. And this is, apart from the technological program, certainly one area where we plan to focus on in the coming years.
Thank you very much. And we're moving to the third speaker and another country, to Cyprus. And Mr. Kyriakos Kokkinos, who is the Deputy Minister to the President of Cyprus for Research, Innovation and Digital Policy. He was, before becoming that, the Chief Scientist for Research and Innovation. So I guess the title by itself says a lot. He also worked a lot, many years in the private sector, which is an interesting combination. Most of our speakers have been in both public and private sector, which the way they work, they function together is, I think, the key to innovation and to the digital age we're moving into. So, Mr. Kokkinos and Cyprus, I guess.
Mr. Ellis and distinguished speakers and good friends, thank you for inviting me on this very important symposium. I think that governments, both Greece and Cyprus, and all other governments are concerned what will be the next norm for economic competitiveness and social prosperity for our citizens. And I think both Greece and Cyprus, we have a common path to follow. We need to build a new economic model which relies, in addition to our traditional industry sectors like tourism and others, it needs to rely on a knowledge-based society. And fortunately, both Greece and Cyprus, we have the most important ingredient that we need, the intellectual capital, our scientists, our research and innovation ecosystem at country level. Now, for me and for my government, there are three pillars to support this new economic model that will take us to the next level of competitiveness. One is the local ecosystems that we already have in place. The second is our diaspora, that so far we did not leverage as we should. We do not have a coherent game plan. We do not have an execution plan. We don't even have a strategy. Sometimes we claim that we have a vision, but a vision without, as Mrs. Diamantopoulou mentioned before, a clear set of goals, accountability and ownership will not be enough. And the third pillar, at least for Cyprus, but I believe the same is valid for Greece, is the fact that we are very small countries. And for this reason, we need to build another pillar and rely through cross-fertilization and collaboration with neighboring countries. For us in Cyprus, Israel is a natural ally, and this is what we do. But also we are at the crossroad between Middle East and North Africa. So an EU member state collaborating and building research and innovation bridges with the neighboring countries is key. So my three pillars are my strong research ecosystem that we have, our diaspora that we didn't leverage, and this is the purpose of this symposium today, to invite, to convince our scientists across the globe. Now there is a new Greece and a new Cyprus for trusting and building bridges and networking. The collaboration between our ecosystems, the diaspora and our local, has been so far been happening on a bottom-up approach. There are strong links at university level, etc., between various scientists across the globe, America, Australia. But there is an absence of a top-down support on that. And this is what we have been missing. And the other thing that we have been very strong in Greece and Cyprus is our research excellence. What we failed or we are weak is how do we translate this research excellence into value add to the real economy? How do we commercialize? And this is what our diaspora can do for us, because they are working and they are excelling in geographies where the translation and research and commercialization is a key ingredient. I will stop here and we can continue through the interactive session to answer to some questions on that. Thank you.
Sorry, thank you very much. And we're moving to the last but not least, as we say, speaker, Mr. Dimas, who is the Deputy Minister for Development and Investment in charge of Research and Technology. He is also somebody, first of all, very young, like Mr. Pierrakakis and also Mrs. Diamantopoulou. He will always eternally be young for us. And he also has worked in the private sector, which for me at least is very interesting, because this helps people when they get into government to deal much better with companies and what has to be done, especially in this age of digital development. So, Mr. Dimas, the floor, we say, is yours, and then we'll move to some questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ellis. First of all, allow me to say that, unfortunately for me, I'm a bit older than Minister Pierrakakis, but it's a great pleasure and honor to be here in this scientific symposium, which I think is a great initiative, and especially to be in this panel with excellent and distinguished speakers. Regarding research and innovation, the Greek government has set three basic goals. First of all, to link more effectively research with innovation and entrepreneurship. Secondly, to increase R&D spending in Greece. And third, to link the fragmented ecosystem in the country. So regarding the first target, allow me to say that if we compare Greece to the other EU member states. In terms of research and education, we're performing rather well, quite competitively to the EU average. But when actually this research is called to be developed into innovation and entrepreneurship, we're actually lagging behind. So this is a great challenge which we're trying to deal with. We have increased the R&D spending in the last years, and it's quite interesting that R&D spending in Greece was mostly a government issue up until 2017, where the majority of funding in R&D came from the public sector. 2017 was the turning point, and ever since the private sector is spending more and more in research and development. In fact, one of our basic initiatives, which we voted last year, was to increase the super deduction tax rates for companies that invest in research and development. We increased the super deduction tax rates from 130% to 200%. This is very important because it gives a further incentive for companies that are already established in Greece to further invest in R&D, but it also makes Greece much more attractive for such investments. And allow me to say that in the last 1.5 years, we have attracted important companies that are investing in R&D, including Microsoft, Amazon, Pfizer, EY, Cisco, Ego, Volkswagen. So there has been a lot of development in this sector. And why is R&D a strategic priority for the government? It is a strategic priority because if we want to keep our scientists and talented individuals in the country, we have to give them good job opportunities, and R&D does create good job opportunities. So it's extremely important in order to keep our scientists and talented individuals here, but also reattract some of them that left the country, that fled the country during the economic crisis. Our third initiative had to do with the ecosystem. Up until recently, the Greek government had no details about the ecosystem, how many startups we had, how many people these startups employed, in which sector they were, what budgets they had. So we had absolutely no information about the startup ecosystem. So even if the Greek government wanted to legislate initiatives that would be beneficiary for the startup ecosystem, we didn't know to whom we would actually implement these reforms. So what did we do? We started looking at best practices of other countries. One of the countries is Israel, because we're trying to work very close with Israel, as Kyriakos Kokkinos said also. And we saw that in certain cases, a national startup registry would work very well. So we did create Elevate Greece, that does act as a national startup entry point as a registry, but also it's a very important tool that gives the opportunity to startups, spin-offs, incubator centers, accelerators, and VC funds to network between them and create synergies, which is extremely important for the startup ecosystem. Elevate Greece has already been working for the last 4.5 months. We have more than 220 startups that have registered up until now, employing more than 2,000 people. They have raised more than 65 million euros from the funds, from the VC funds. These are some first data. It hasn't yet been completed, but it does give us a very good first picture of the Greek startup ecosystem, and it's actually quite interesting to state that 20% of our startups come from life sciences, approximately 10% from tourism, environment, and another 10% from agri-tech also. So we start have important details about our startup ecosystem. Last but not least, Greece doesn't have a natural ground for innovation. We are creating an innovation district in Attica. An innovation district is a natural matchmaking ground where R&D departments of companies, startuppers, spin-offs, and the innovators create synergies in order to produce innovative products or services. It's proceeding quite quickly through a public-private partnership. The international tender has started, and until the 19th of April, we have set that date as a final date for the first offers regarding the company, the consortium, to be more accurate, that will actually start creating an innovation district in Athens. So we hope that until the beginning of 2022, we will have a consortium ready to start building an innovation district in Athens, which we consider to be a very important step, not only for Athens or Greece, but it will become a reference point for innovation in Southeastern Europe and the Balkans.
Thank you very much. So that concludes the first round, let's say, of speeches. Let me point out, because we mentioned some people being young, unfortunately, I covered Mr. Dimas's father as a minister, which might say something, but maybe I was very young. Maybe I was a high school at that time. So most spoke, or a few, about reskilling. And to be honest, what I see and I hear from the average person is concern. Some are even scared about this new age, everything being digital, this new norm of big data, artificial intelligence. So can each of you, just in 1 or 2 minutes, I don't want a huge philosophical answer, but what would you say to the average person in Greece and Cyprus, but I guess all over the world, or how should she or he deal with that? Should we be afraid? Should we accept it and live with it? Is there something that we can do to make it easier? Let me start with Mrs. Diamantopoulou.
Thank you. You're right. This is one of the most important issues, and it must be a priority in governmental policies. A few points. The first one is that we all know that there is a need for a total fundamental reform in the educational systems. I could give the title Aristoteles and computing, Aristoteles and coding. And it is being linked with what we have said and with the discussion we have already done, that now in our era, we need both. We need the humanistic skills and we need the digital skills. But it is an imperative to understand that we need both. Otherwise, we have to compete with the machines, and we cannot. I mean, it is the human being, are the human beings who have to occupy the world. So on the one side, on the educational systems, we need a fundamental reform in the curricula vitae of primary and secondary education. And then we're coming to the adults. We come to the universities and to the adults. I think we are entering an era where we have to discuss about the universal right of having access to education during our whole life. If this is not the case, I'm afraid that a big part of our societies will be excluded from the labor market. So we can see what is going on in the world. And I could refer to a few examples in Singapore, in Korea, in Denmark, and in some lenders in Germany, where there are these vouchers. This is why I refer to that an adult can make use it and can choose where to go in order to have this kind of new digital skills in the private sector or in the public sector. But at any rate, these companies or this public service must be certified, of course. So 2 points. The first one, it is a universal right, so it is a new big political and ideological discussion. And the second one is a different organization of having access to these training services.
We're moving to Mr. Pierrakakis, but let me add to what you said. My question also included in my mind the question about the government and the private sector. Who does the reskilling? Does the private sector, who's more qualified, maybe being subsidized government? Is it better that the government does it, as you mentioned, through our lifetime or more specifically during school years? I mean, we're at the point where we're discussing this, we're debating this, so I'm sure, you know, ideas will come and go. Mr. Pierrakakis, your thoughts on that?
First of all, let me say that from the policymaker standpoint, the key challenge is to design services and to design processes which are both digital and physical, meaning that they need to be as simple as possible and provide access to 100% of the citizens. So to give one example here, let me quote the vaccination platform that we have in Greece, where on the one hand, you have a fully digital system where you can book your appointments. You have a secondary digital system where the state contacts you via SMS and you can confirm your appointment. But on the other hand, you can book your appointment in a pharmacy store or in a citizen service center. I think that this is a model overall vis-a-vis how the state should be designing its interaction with citizens. But putting that aside, reskilling is obviously an absolute necessity. Now, first, you need to design digital services as simple as possible, even those who are purely digital, so that the maximum amount of people can have access to them regardless of their level of digital skills. But to a certain extent, this is not possible. So there, we need to design specific reskilling policies with regards to how to increase the overall skills in society. As a government, for instance, we deployed the National Digital Academy during the first lockdown last year. It's part of our government program, of our government portal, and we have more than 200 classes there, and the self-assessment tool where one can either learn advanced things like coding in specific programming languages, or very simple things, how to Google, even something as simple as that. But this is not, of course, the answer. It's a segment of the answer. The answer needs to be targeted programs of reskilling. And overall, I think that we have two trends that underline the need towards further reskilling on behalf of university systems, on behalf of states, on behalf of companies. To answer your question, both the public and the private sector should do it. Now, the two trends are on the one hand, the demographic changes. Every 4 years on average, we win a year of life expectancy. This has been a linear change overall in the 20th century, and it's continuing. A child born now on most European countries has more than 50% chances of reaching a life up to 100. So the three-phase life of education, work, pension, in that sense, is over. You will enter and re-enter the labor market with different skills, and you will have different careers. And this means, together with the second force, which is the technological disruption, that you need to have very targeted programs which will enable you to do so. So you need many layers of policy. Some programs will be simple for the overall population. Some other programs need to be more targeted. If you work in the public sector, you need to be upskilled perhaps to learn something extra on digital. So we need to go into the nitty-gritty in this policy design. And again, let me underline and close with this, that the RRF and the overall financial capabilities that we will have in front of us in the coming years should be leveraged and should be designed, and this is the view and the policy of this government, in the reskilling sphere, to both offer generic and wide reskilling programs for the overall population, but also targeted programs in specific targeted population groups.
What's the view from Cyprus? I was asking Mr. Kokkinos on how the average Cypriot views this transformation, and what does the government or the private sector do to respond to the need for reskilling?
Well, more or less, we do the same. We have the same approach on the narrow sense of reskilling as Mrs. Diamantopoulou at policy level, and as my friend Kyriakos Pierrakakis mentioned. But allow me to take also a different stand, that reskilling is not only digital reskilling. We need to touch things like competencies and soft skills, like agility, because you need to be agile, entrepreneurship, critical thinking. And this is not just the job of the Ministry of Education. It's the job of the society, of the family. The appetite to try and experiment, the appetite to challenge the truth, to get into a different level or another level of truth. This has to do with our competitiveness. What we need is to help them be more agile, to be adaptive, because the status quo, the way that we have been skilled, trained, our university degrees, our jobs, are very different from the future jobs that they will have to cope with. More than 50% of the jobs that our kids will be asked to consider or serve have not been yet invented. And a lot of the jobs that our people are being educated at our universities today have not, will not have a future. So for me, reskilling is something more challenging than just touching the digital aspect of reskilling. And this is what every government has to do. And because this symposium is about our diaspora and our scientists across the globe, I'm sure we have a lot to learn from them, especially from those that they work in geographies, where the soft skill element, the critical thinking, the collaborative spirit of education has been embedded into their pedagogical and economic fabric. So for me, this is a challenge, and it's not a challenge of this government or the next government. It's an ongoing challenge. If we want our economies and our societies to be competitive by 2030, we need to be more daring and make interventions at this level. Otherwise, we will just, follow the gap that we already have with the rest of the economies. Thank you.
Mr. Dimas, quickly, your thoughts, and then I'll move to more specific questions to each one of you. Mr. Deputy Minister.
Okay, if there's one word which I would actually underline and bold, this word would be adaptability. And I want to give some quick examples. You can not run a successful company in 2021 in the same way you managed it in 2011. Or in my view, you cannot run a government in the same terms and standards as you did 10 years ago. So it's extremely important to have the capability to adapt. And allow me to give me one more example, which I think is indicative. If you actually see the top 20 companies in terms of financial worth, if you see the 20th century, you will practically see that the companies were largely the same from the beginning till the end of the 20th century. With the so-called digital revolution, these things changed so quickly that most of the companies that are now in the top 20 were perhaps hadn't even been founded until the late 1990s. This is extremely important in order to understand that we live in a world that develops so quickly that we must have the capability to adapt to the needs of the modern world. I definitely agree with Minister Pierrakakis that it's an issue for both the government and the private sector. It's also what Kyriakos Kokkinos said. It's an issue that goes beyond institutions, but even within the family and all of us, we must have the ability to adapt to the new needs. And one of the persons, perhaps the first that I have heard of always mentioning how important reskilling and upskilling in the public discourse at a European frame is Ms. Diamantopoulou, equally important for younger age people to have the capability to reskill themselves and to update their knowledge according to the needs of the modern society.
Thank you very much. Let me move quickly. We only have less than 15 minutes to Mrs. Diamantopoulou. Let me take the round. As a minister in the past for development research, your experience, because a lot of times the word Silicon Valley comes up, your experience with that cooperation with Silicon Valley, things that Greece and Cyprus, actually, small countries like us, because we usually use Israel as an example for startups, for innovation. So how could Greece and Cyprus, their companies, their governments, work and learn from Silicon Valley based on your experience as a minister in the past?
Thank you. Can you see me? Because I can hear you, but I cannot see anything. Can you see me?
We can see you, yes, yes. And we can hear you.
Okay, never mind. Okay, I can speak without looking at you. Yes, I think I will try to give in a few minutes my experience, because I think it is it was quite important. What we can see in Silicon Valley. No, Greece cannot have a Silicon Valley. You are right. It's a small country. But there are many, many Greeks, and not only scientists, but venture capitalists, angel investors, many Greek companies, and they are all very much willing to help and to support Greece. On the other side, there are some very successful examples. So let me just give you a few ideas. First, in Silicon Valley, there are some very successful networks, the French one, the Danish one, the Israeli one, and the most successful of all, the Indian one. So what they do, they are networks. There are, for example, French scientists or Indian scientists. They support and they attract their natives in Silicon Valley. They work with them, and then they support economically and legally them to go back to their country. So I think it's very important to organize this kind of networks, and we can have this experience. At that time, I have been in Silicon Valley with Kyriakos, Pierrakakis, as I told you before, and we have met more than 55 Greeks in all sectors. The second important issue is that there you can find some interesting ideas. For example, we have worked with the plug and play incubator. There are many incubators. They are all of them private. And what they do is that they offer space, legal support, and access to different kinds of financial instruments to young students and to young innovative entrepreneurs. And the third issue was this financing, the new financing engineering. So the way that the venture capitalists are organized, they are for the small companies, for the innovative small startups, for medium size, for very big companies. It is not the banking system which is coming to support the first steps. So it is the venture capitalists, and it is the angel investors who really support the very first steps. And there are many Greeks there, many Greeks. I mean, it is surprising how many of them can work in this field and how willing they are to come to Greece. And my last point, the problem to bring back Greeks, or to work with Greeks there, or to organize our networks in an effective way, it is not money. It is institutions. So this is the main issue, how we simplify our institutional framework and how we allow people to work without huge difficulties.
I was asking Mr. Pierrakakis about his policy on dealing with 5G, which is, I said, the future, but then corrected myself. I said it's probably the present. How is he dealing with this? Because we're at the point where we take decisions, we set up processes to enter this new world.
Overall, I think that the 5G policy, as your question effectively underlines, and this is why I mentioned it before, is one of the most significant examples on how one can hit many birds with one stone, in a sense, how you can leverage resources both on the research ecosystem, develop research ecosystems, and create innovative spin-offs. I think that overall here, there is a narrative about capacity building in all this discussion, specifically on how one can learn from Silicon Valley. As Anna Diamantopoulou mentioned before, there are certain lessons to be taken from other places, and there are other lessons that one needs to develop domestically. Overall, I think that in our digital agenda, just to point this out, we had a very eclectic approach. We viewed that there are certain things we can learn, and there are certain things which are not emulatable. Reforms are a little bit like transplants. You need to have donor-receiver compatibility. So on certain projects, Kyriakos Kokkinos knows this very well because we have been collaborating very closely between us in certain projects. But on certain things, for instance, we tried to learn from Estonia on their identity ecosystem policy. We tried to learn from the United Kingdom on our government digital portal. We tried to learn from Israel on the renovation ecosystem and all the work that Christos Dimas is doing, but also on how one can leverage the army service in order to develop specific skills. And this is something that we're focusing on together with Nikos Panagotopoulos, as the Prime Minister has mentioned in Greece last September, vis-a-vis how the mandatory army service can change, and we can potentially inject digital skills within it. And on other topics, like the 5G policy that you mentioned, we were the ones to innovate. And in a sense, this capacity comes domestically, it comes from experts, comes from people who are really aware of the needs of a specific policy question and an ecosystem, but also requires leveraging resources and monetizing and setting up specific KPIs. So on 5G, and I shall conclude with this, EY made a very significant research contribution to our ministry, and pointed out that the potential economic gain from 5G technologies in Greece and the vertical sectors that will change up to 2030 is 12.4 billion euros gross value added, and 69,000 jobs can potentially be created if we follow the policy which we have designed and we have started following. Thus, it's a significant potential that we seek to unleash, and we're quite confident that this will happen.
Thank you very much. Let me ask Mr. Kokkinos, in your speech, you mentioned that you put it, it's the role of Cyprus as a regional sciences and technology hub. How can Greeks and Cypriots scientists, be part of it and take advantage of it, contribute to that?
I find the Greek ecosystem an integral part of our ecosystem, and certainly we should work together to establish our geographies as strong, trusted, robust ecosystems for attracting science and technology companies. This is on a mutual win-win basis, simply because the cross-fertilization and the collaboration and the enhancement on our knowledge bandwidth will become very, very competitive. Now, there are 3 or 4 main pillars that we need to address if we want to achieve that. Some of them have been already mentioned. For example, the institutional environment. If you are not a business-friendly country and you have a lot of regulatory restrictions, or your legal framework, or your fiscal policy, or the immigration policy from third country scientists to come to Greece or Cyprus are not competitive and attractive, then it's like discouraging them. So the institutional environment and the institutional framework is the most important aspect that I'm personally working on at my ministry today. The second aspect is the human capital. The upskilling and the reskilling has been already mentioned, but there is something more than that. Is how do you modernize your university curriculum? In Cyprus, we have 3 public universities and 6 private universities, but their output, compared to what the market requires, is 3 to 5, sometimes more years, what the market needs. A specialist on data scientists, and now that I mentioned data scientists, all disciplines, humanities, chartered accountants, legal, they need to understand the value of data. And this has to start from our university. So human capital and attracting and retaining talent, or mobilizing scientists and talent across the globe for collaboration, is education needs to be improved. Our banking systems, our market entry, fast and simple setups, our collaborations, our business practices, our business constructs, all these are extremely important aspects. So 4 points if we want to become, and you cannot declare yourself as I am a regional hub. It's something to be won through your work and be trusted. It's not a title that you will be given, it's a title that it will be earned. So institutional environment, human capital, infrastructure, and market and business sophistication. These are the 4 pillars of that.
Thank you very much. Actually, I wanted to point out, and I see that some of the people who are watching are saying that, and I agree totally, that upskilling during the military service, the thing that I think Mr. Pierrakakis pointed out, it's a very interesting point, because unfortunately, especially in Greece, the military service in most of our minds is lost time. So in this case, it could work not only in a positive way for the people themselves, but for the economy or the country. Let me pose, we only have like a couple of minutes, the last question to Mr. Dimas on which sectors do you feel Greece should, which ones should it emphasize, work on as far as innovation and research? Because I assume we all want to be everywhere, but we can't. So there's a finite time and resources available. So where should the country like Greece emphasize?
Allow me to say that, first of all, our goal is not to try to compete with Silicon Valley or even Israel, but our goal is to play a leading role in research and innovation in Southeastern Europe and the Balkans. So Greece must be capable of taking advantage of its extremely good human capital, but also start attracting. But we should be capable of.
We only have a minute.
Attracting. Okay, we should be capable of attracting talent from neighboring countries. Now, regarding sectors, we should emphasize much more in sectors that deal with the climate crisis. Don't forget that the EU funds through Horizon Europe to a great extent a lot of projects that deal with the climate crisis, whether that has to do with environment or energy. Then we should definitely give a special focus to life sciences, where we have the scientists available within the country, but even outside the country also. A sector where I really believe we should also invest more has to do with linking more effectively research and innovation with agriculture, and take into account that in certain products, the productivity rates, due to the knowledge and expertise they have in the Netherlands, in Israel, is even 10 times more effective than in Greece. But of course, shipping and tourism, which are extremely important for the economy. But these are sectors where Greece could actually have a competitive advantage at a global scale. This doesn't mean that there aren't important opportunities in other sectors, such as logistics, for example, or culture and issues like that. So.
I'd like to thank you, because we have to move. We're very strict, I'm told, with the time slots. So it's, what is it? It's 1:30, so we're moving on to the next panel. I thank you for a very informative, and actually we don't, or at least myself, I don't usually say that, but it was informative with specific ideas and proposals and descriptions. And a very informative and interesting discussion. I thank Mrs. Diamantopoulou, I thank Mr. Pierrakakis, Mr. Kokkinos, and Mr. Dimas. I thank the organizers, and we're moving. I encourage all the viewers, and there are quite a few from what I see, to continue watching the next session. Let me take the opportunity to send my regards to Mr. Kremizis, who is in the next section, but he's a very close friend of mine, or a good friend of mine from Washington. Again, thank you very much.